Comparing Mercedes 6-cylinder and 8-cylinder engines, part 2. So in our last videos, we looked at the early 3.5, 4.5 V8s, and we looked at M180, M127, and similar engines, the older Mercedes inline sixes. We talked about the M110 a little bit, which was sort of the transition engine between the Mercedes engine of the past and the Mercedes engine of the future. Now we're going to look at the M103, which eventually replaced the M110. The M103 was the swan song of Mercedes 6-cylinder engines. It did everything extremely well, including needing head gaskets occasionally and having some expensive stuff to replace it. For the most part, they just run and run and run. They're fine running at 5,000 RPM. They're fine running at 1,500 RPM. They pull air conditioning really well. They do everything extremely well. And so that's one of the reasons why the M103 engine sort of brought Mercedes 6-cylinder gasoline engines back to market relevancy. Now, at the same time, the M103 in the United States is competing for engine bay space in the 126 chassis with the 4.2 liter and 5.6 liter engines. And in the mid-size class, in the E-Class, it was competing with some diesel engines, but eventually the diesels had to be phased out, in and out because of emissions concerns, which is stupid if you ask me, but whatever, that's the way it was. And the SLs, had the option of an M103 as well, but for the United States, Leo Levine, our marketing director, dictated that all the SLs should have V8s for the US. So there was a 380 SL, and then later on the 560 SL, but there was a 280 SL with the M110 engine, and there was a 300 SL with the M103 engine. Both of these are really great cars. Now, here's what I like about the M103, besides all this stuff that I listed. It actually gets over 20 miles per gallon if you drive it like a normal person. This was a big deal because you could never get 20 miles per gallon out of any Mercedes engine unless you had an M110 with a 5-speed manual, and then you'd get like 21, 22. But for the most part, these are 20 mile per gallon engines. They'll get a solid 20 to 22 miles per gallon. While it's not modern Toyota Camry mileage, I don't care. It's analog. It starts, it runs, it's smooth, it's got power. Why not? On the other hand, you have issues with the M103 with the belt tensioners. If you've ever tried to do one, you know what I mean. The water pump, even taking the fan clutch off is a pain in the butt, even with the factory tool. You end up slicing your hand up on the front of the radiator. There's just not enough room in those engine bays, even on the S-Class, because the M103 is a long engine. Imagine servicing the M103 in a 190E 2.6. What an awful experience. I mean, it's just horrible to get to. So as a mechanic, I really never enjoyed that part. But again, they're some of the most reliable Mercedes 6-cylinder engines. Now, if you compare them to the V8s, by this time, the V8 engines were basically like as refined as they were going to get. 4.2, 5.6, they almost never need bottom end work. You could take the fan clutch off in minutes. You could do the belts in like a half hour to 45 minutes if everything is right. You can take them apart and do fuel injectors easily. You don't have the fuel distributor blocking injectors 3 and 4 like on an M103 engine. You do have to do timing chains in the V8, which is highly procedural, and that's something that the M103 engine almost never needs. But on the other hand, the V8 engines almost never need head gaskets, and if they do, it's because they're weeping oil out of the back. They don't start mixing coolant and oil in the coolant reservoir like an M103 engine does. So I still think, even though they're relatively inefficient, the V8s are the better engines. They're my preferred engines. But I will say that the M103 was a high quality engine as well. And if you don't want a V8, it is like a reasonable alternative. Versus like if you're looking at a 1968 280S versus a 72 280 SE 4.5, I don't even have to think about it and say that the 280 SE 4.5 is the better car. Um, Although if you're looking at a 6-cylinder 280 SE with the inline six, I'll probably say that that's the best one of the three because it's so reliable. So I don't know, my opinions sometimes are all over the place depending on the cars that come in. Now, one last consideration, we're going to look at the M119 engine. The M119 engine was probably, in my opinion, the M119 960 and 961, well, no, just the 960, sorry, with KE Jetronic injection was the best iteration of the Mercedes V8 program. It's easy to service. You can change a belt tensioner in minutes. You may have to take it apart and do the cam oiler tubes once in a while. There are these little black bridges that go underneath the cam supports. You need to do caps and rotors or what have you. But the M119 was let down by electronic fuel injection and the need for electronic diagnosis. And these engines became, I would say, very difficult to service when that became the case. So, but I still like the M119. I lament the fact that the M119 960 never made it into a 560 SEC. I lament the fact it never made it into, the 500E. The 500E would have been so much nicer if it had a fuel distributor and 330 horsepower instead of the electronic version of that engine. Not that the 500E is a bad car, but I prefer the 500E over the 500 SL's engine over the 500E. I just don't care much for the R129 chassis, but that's a story for another day. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Tap the bell for notifications. These are just my thoughts. They're sometimes not applicable in real-world scenarios, and sometimes they are all too real. So, take it with a grain of salt. Don't take this necessarily as all the purchasing advice you need to know. There's definitely more. So, enjoy working on your Mercedes Benz and try to pick the car that is right for your skill set.